You're watching Beyond Markets. Welcome, I'm Kenneth Igbomo. Coming up on today's show, we'll discuss food security in Nigeria. Particularly, we'll find out how flooding across the country is threatening food production, especially with rice. Don't forget you can always join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Beyond Markets and follow me at Kenneth Igbomo. Nigeria's Minister for Agriculture and Rural Development, Audu Ogbeh, says the country plans to stop importation of rice by 2020 and become a net exporter of the crop. But flooding across the country poses a threat to this tall ambition. Richard Ogundele, the founder and CEO of JMSF Agribusiness Nigeria, joins me for this discussion. Thank you for your time, Richard.
Thank you, Ken. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, quickly, I just want you to comment on the ambition for Nigeria to become a net exporter of rice.
Thank you very much. To be very candid and to be fair to the Honorable Minister, it's achievable. We were actually on track, but for this issue of flooding in this current year, 2018. If we take the statistics of the rice value chain in Nigeria, which I'm sure so many people are aware of, as of 2016, we were able to produce 17.5 million metric tons of rice paddy. That is after the 12.4% post-harvest loss we usually incur on an annual basis. Now, from that 17.5 million metric tons, we're able to get 5.8 million metric tons of milled rice. That represented 84% of our total annual demand, which is set at 7 million metric tons for milled rice. This is based on our 2016 survey of rice clusters in Nigeria, comprising of 18 states that produce 80% of the total production of the country. Interestingly, out of these 18 states, 72% of that comes from the northwest Nigeria. And at the moment, the flooding is ravaging this same area of the country, this geopolitical zone of the country. And I tell you, we are sitting quite on a serious case here.
So we're looking at a serious food security crisis coming up, or is that what you're saying?
Definitely, there will be shortage of production this year because most of the fields have already been flooded. On the watch list are major producing states like Kebbi State, Kano at the moment. So if we take out Kebbi, Kano, where the real production heavy figures come from, it means we're going to be having a huge shortage, and that's going to give room for need to import more rice. As at the last count in 2014, which is about the last known figure that I can talk about correctly, we're spending ₦1 billion daily on importation of rice. We've had a couple of figures between then and now, and it's a little bit hard to tell exactly how much we're spending, but we're still spending money on importation of rice. Because if you look at the 7 million metric tons of milled rice that we require, and we're able to meet just 5.8 million metric tons, so we still have a shortfall of 1.2 million. Now, with the flooding on ground, it means we will need to get more rice into the country. Currently, the consumption is at 34 kilograms per capita per year. This is projected to grow at a rate of 4.5% annually. And the demand for rice has increased twice more than the production in the last 10 years. So we are really in need of more rice than we are able to produce. So talking about being a net exporter, yes, if we had a consistent production, we did not have an issue of flooding like we do have on our hands now, I can tell you that yes, 2020 will be a reality. But right now, as we speak, we need to really quickly do something about that.
I want you to speak around the ecosystem in Nigeria and what makes it peculiar. We know we have issues around security, you know, when you talk about the farmer and herdsman clashes. Now,
the rice value chain really has a lot of issues around the production side of the value chain, the segment. We have quality issues. We have large formal integrated mills that really require huge volumes of paddy, but cannot get to this paddy. We have the cottage millers, who are the small processors who have more access to paddy because of the social relations they have with the farmers. Now, considering the fact that we have been recording farmer-headman clashes in the last 3 to 4 years, even before this administration came on board, we've gotten to that critical part now where people don't go to the farm anymore as much as they used to in the past, and that has had an impact already on what we're producing. If we add flooding to it, it means we will probably be running out of food in the next 2 years, thereabout. Food shortage is really a big issue. We've not addressed it properly. Now, we have serious border issues. At the moment, we have 1,014 porous land borders officially on record. The only 2 functioning borders are the Sembe and the Diroko borders, and that's where we have some form of control. The other parts of the country is just a walk-in, walk-out, the way it is, for the best of my knowledge. We will need to address what makes the farmers and the herders to have clashes. Where are the grazing routes? Where are the grazing reserves? Are we really giving enough attention to the livestock sector in the country? Livestock is just about 2% of Nigeria's agribusiness portfolio. Over the last 5 or 4 administrations in this country, government successively has not given attention to the livestock sector. Therefore, what we're experiencing today in form of farmers and headmen clashing is just the result of neglect of a sector. The Fulanis that we are all complaining about, yes, they have a nomadic lifestyle, but they can be introduced to a better system if the infrastructure is there. We've supported crop production, which has about 86% of Nigerian agribusiness portfolio over all these years, but we haven't done much for livestock. Therefore, we will need to start to address those fundamental core issues, which are the reasons why we're having clashes between herdsmen and the farmers. They must graze their cattle, they must give them water. They are used to certain routes which are no longer existing because urbanization has taken over. People have started building houses on these grazing reserves. It might interest us to know that even the Abuja airport, where we all go to, on the plan is supposed to be a grazing reserve, but that's been taken over. So we need to go back to the drawing board. The northern part of the country is where the animals are most suitable to thrive. And if we start our piloting by introducing these Fulani herdsmen to small feedlot operations, and from there they become clusters, and then they have access to big ranching facilities, then they will become sedentary instead of being nomadic, and we can then begin to introduce education to them. Without education, without introduction and the technical capacity of these herdsmen to understand modern farming, we will keep having these clashes. Farmers are used to working on their land, but they also need to understand how these herdsmen think, how can they accommodate them. It's supposed to be a symbiotic relationship, but right now everybody's thinking of himself alone. So from a conflict resolution point of view, we need to understand the key issues. There's a lot of talk going on, but are we addressing the core issues? Climate change is on our hands. Our agriculture is not climate smart. We don't have insurance for most of our activities, so presently as this flooding has occurred, I'm quite sure most of the farmers will lose out, just like we had the case of tuta absoluta in tomatoes some years back. So we need to change the system of our production and then link that to a proper post-harvest handling. Rice sector, as it is in this country, we lose 12.4% at post-harvest. Now, during the farm gate processing, they do most of these things manually. That alone accounts for another 22% of the wastage you get from threshing. So if you bring in some mechanization at that point, you could save that 22%. That would be more income for the farmers in terms of paddy that they will be able to sell to the millers. Now, for the industrial millers, their challenge is getting access to quality paddy consistently at the right volume that they will need it. And this is where the commodity value chain across all sectors in the agricultural portfolio in Nigeria is suffering. We do not have an organized coordination and aggregation of Nigerian farmers, whether it's in grains, whether it's in fresh vegetables, name it. In addition to that, logistics and handling for agricultural produce in Nigeria, they are lacking. In the last 58 years as a country, we have concentrated more on our oil and left agriculture behind. So we are in the 21st century, but the knowledge on ground for our people and the rural areas who are farming is that of the old that their fathers used. So we really need to cover that gap of giving them knowledge of what modern agriculture is all about.
So interesting. You've touched on some very salient points there. You've talked about security, to porous borders, to the quality in the rice, now logistics and handling. And then we'll I'd like to take it back to the flooding. And you mentioned something also very important there, that's the effect of climate change. You know, what would you say is the quality of response we're seeing from governments regarding this climate change?
For me, I'm a very positive-minded person. I am sure that the government is aware of the issue of climate change. I'm also sure they're trying to do some things about it, but for us here who are experts in the field, what we can say is they should speed up what they're trying to do and try to ensure that policies are quickly put in place and supported by implementation. It's not enough to have several workshops, talk shops, and then we don't take any action to back them up. The minister, as a person, I know he has good intentions, but in terms of between when these policies are discussed, put down on paper, and implemented, there are lots of gaps there. If we take the EROGP, for example, into consideration, the EROGP has some lofty ideas in there. But as we speak, a couple of them have not yet been implemented. Some are still trying to get funding, and budgetary issues in our country are also part of the problems. We have a budgetary delay on an annual basis. So if you have a budget for a year and it's not passed until the third quarter of the year, when do you actually expect to implement everything on that budget? So the system is not helping us. And the people who take the hit the most are the poor ones on the farms who are trying to just get by with their lives. Even for us as experts, when we try to engage them, they hit you with these issues and you are lost as to how best can you address this thing. Access to finance is a major challenge. The interest rate is not helping matters. And for agriculture to really thrive, any interest rate above 5% will not make sense in terms of agriculture, and we really need to take this into consideration.
So hold that thought, Richard. We'll get to all these points in the other half of this show. I've been speaking to Richard Ogundele, the founder and CEO of JMSF, Agribusiness Nigeria. Still with me, discussing the looming threat of flooding to Nigeria's drive for self-sufficiency in rice production, is Richard Ogundele, the founder and CEO of JMSF, Agribusiness Nigeria. Richard, I'd like to pick up on where we left off on the earlier conversation. I'd like you to speak now directly to what we can do to address post-harvest losses, especially the role technology can play in this.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, like we've always been saying, and I'm sure everybody knows that now, that agriculture is a business. And because it's a business, then we need accurate data. Without data, you cannot stimulate investments into the sector. People will not know exactly where the opportunities are and how to go after them. And this is where the data produced by JMSF project, funded by the DFID UK aid in 2017, which is actually talking about rice cluster mapping. It's really a very good tool because right now, we can confidently say that data enabled the federal government to understand clearly and corroborate their own internal surveys that yes, Nigeria is on the path of self-sufficiency. At the moment, we have 165 rice clusters in Nigeria across 18 states. And these 165 clusters have sub-clusters of 2,812 in 96 local government areas in this 18 states. It's interesting to note that this survey was able to reach 1.4 million Nigerian farmers, representing 17.7% of farming families. And the critical part is that wet season accounts for 75% of the production of rice in Nigeria, while 25% is the dry season. And now we're getting flooding. So in terms of post-harvest management, which you're talking about to reduce post-harvest losses, we need to introduce technology, and starting with simple machines like threshers. The farmers need to have access to threshing services, which will save them that loss of 22% from the manual approach they adopt at the moment. Anything a farmer loses impacts his bottom line. So if we have technology that can help them regain that, create job in the process, then we'll say we're improving the farmer's bottom line, we're stimulating the rural economy of that environment where rice is being produced, and the quality of paddy getting to the processor is also improved. Every processor, whether it's a cottage miller or a large industrial processor, wants quality paddy consistently and in large volume. The other aspect of things we were able to do on GEMS 4 back then is to put in place a commodity sourcing system, which we call the Agro Support Service provision, where someone sees that missing link between organizing farmers, coordinating them, giving them that training to ensure that agronomic practices are followed up to harvesting and the threshing is done, which is a very important post-harvest loss reduction strategy, and then putting them in proper bags, storing them, after which they are now moved to the processor, whether it's large industrial or the cottage miller. Everyone has a premium that they pay for this purpose, and the person who does this linkage between the production end and the processing end gets a fee on both sides. If we introduce that service across all commodity value chains, not just rice in Nigeria, we will be on our way towards beginning to put structures in place to facilitate local processing as well as export.
Very interesting, very interesting recommendation you are giving there. But I would like you now to speak to the role of partnerships, between government, private, and the private sector, and now especially when we see a threat like flooding coming in to add to the whole mix we're seeing here. Kindly speak to this point.
Thank you. Partnerships and collaborations are really the solution to what is on ground. The farmers don't want to do any other thing apart from just to produce. The processor, whether it's a cottage miller or an industrial processor, doesn't have that wherewithal to go to the farmer and start sourcing for paddy, which is his raw material, but they're forced to do that. So if that gap is filled up and someone is coordinating the farmers, aggregating the paddy and bringing it to the processors, they just concentrate on processing. Then there is the market side of things where marketing, sales and distribution happens and it gets to the consumer at the right price. In terms of organizing this as a partnership, what the government needs to do here is first to understand the fact that at the production side of things, they need to ensure that there's access to inputs, access to fertilizers, seeds, chemicals, and ensure that the extension delivery service is up and running. Without this side of things going on, production will continuously be suboptimal. We're trying to make sure that we hit that self-sufficiency target and then become a net exporter. But if we can't get that done, it's not going to happen. So it means we need to bring in private extension delivery services here. That's why that fellow, whoever the entity is, that will coordinate and organize farmers, he also has to be an entrepreneur. He has to introduce that extension delivery service to the farmer and ensure that there is transport and logistics in place to move produce from the farm gate to the processor. The partnership here will be very simple. The processor guarantees that he or she or an entity will buy the produce from the farm through this coordinator who renders the agro support service to the farmer and to the processor. The government ensures that where you need to have roads, just grade them. You don't need to tar them, just open them up with earth-moving machines, put drainages on the sides so that people, vehicles can go in and out to move out produce. It's very disheartening to go to nearby Nasarawa towns when it's harvest time and you see how they struggle to move out produce. At times they have to put them on their heads, around their backs, and that's very, very difficult. You can't really get much volume out of that. If it starts raining all of a sudden, everything is gone. There's no storage for this.
This logistics usage you're talking about is also impacting, how farmers tend to scale up a business of this nature.
Yes, I can tell you confidently that in the last 6 to 10 years, a lot of international development projects have worked a lot on ensuring that our value chains become more efficient. But what we need to begin to look at now is agricultural transport and logistics service provision. For rice and all the other commodities, we need to get them out of the farms quickly, in proper condition, and stored. Babangida is doing that as part of its service to its partners on its program. Green Sahel Agro Ventures in Jigawa State is offering these, but these are just 2 entities. Perhaps Tribe Agri could be doing this, maybe Farm Crowdy will be doing this, but in a country where we have over 195 million people and we're just able to touch 1.4 million farmers directly from the survey I mentioned, this is a drop in an ocean. So there's a huge market opportunity for that service out there. Now, for bankers who would like to lend money to this sector, they need to know where the farm clusters are. They need to know how many farmers engaged in it, what's the percentage of male or female, what's their demographics, and what is actually the volume financially that will be required to trigger the markets in these different locations. The cluster map provides that. And as an investment tool, it helps decision makers to take decisions quickly. For example, those who need to move inputs into the clusters will know, I have X number of farmers here. They will need X metric tons of seed, chemicals, fertilizer, and their market is waiting for them to be tapped. If we don't have accurate data and statistics of our commodity value chains in Nigeria, we will be making policies that we can't actualize. Apart from tomato and rice, which we worked on GEMS 4, I am not sure other commodity value chains have this kind of accurate data that can be referred to and verified and double-checked. So we need to get more data. So we all refer to the FAO statistics for data concerning crops across Africa in Nigeria. That's fine, but we need to do these things ourselves and understand them. The data you'll be getting from these sources might be old, and they need to be renewed every 2 years. What I'm talking to you about now was done in 2016. This is 2018. We haven't renewed that because the entities that they were handed over to have not done anything about it. But at the moment, this is the most credible data I can quote and refer to in terms of planning to move the value chain forward.
So data, and more data is what you're preaching.
Yes,
data. And also, you also mentioned something quite interesting there, which is homegrown solutions. I look back and I know about the African risk capacity. It's one of the solutions of the African Union to address extreme weather events. And we're looking at this flooding year. This is also one of the offshoots of weather events. I'd like to now move to another aspect of this, which is, insuring against, incidences such as this. Are we seeing more homegrown solutions locally in Nigeria?
I would say yes to that to a large extent, because farmers in the rural areas have gradually began to think that, look, we need to work with willing partners who are willing to help us, because we are tired of waiting for promises that are never fulfilled. So in terms of appropriate technology to solve local problems within the agricultural value chains, they're beginning to happen. In Kano right now, we have the zero energy cooling chamber where farmers used to cool their fruits and vegetables where they don't have power. This is a homegrown technology developed by one of the project partners to help the farmers cool their produce before they take them to the market. Now, for rice, when it comes to this particular value chain that everybody is interested in, the demand for rice is definitely more than what we are producing. So how do we ensure that we grow more at a shorter time? How do we ensure that the 10% of the arable land that is currently cultivated is efficiently utilized so that the yield that we're getting from that 10% of the land cultivated is maximized? We don't really, as much as need to go and get all the land turned into rice farms. The ones we are cultivating, are we optimizing them? So technology needs to be put in place. Our research institutes have a lot of researches in there sitting on the shelf, but they're not brought out to those who really need them, to put them into trial and be sure that, yes, they're effective and addressing the business solutions that they require. So I will suggest that a lot of the research institutes out there who are supposed to come up with homegrown solutions, working hand in hand with the farmers or the experts who are working with them, need to be more entrepreneurial in their approach. Research is good, but if it doesn't come to the market, if it doesn't come to those who need them, we will know those innovations exist, and we need to begin to push for more homegrown technology. The foreign ones have different considerations which may not immediately suit the environment they want to put them into use. So we need to get our own local engineers. The National Center for Agri Mechanization in Loring is there. They need to go out more. For storage issues, we need to talk to NISPRI.
So we're looking at data here, homegrown solutions, technology, improving access to finance to help farmers scale up their productions, you know, dealing with post-harvest losses. At least we've tried to cover some of the main issues in there. I'm afraid we are done. We are out of time for this one for now, but I'll say we'll keep our eyes on this sector and see how this flooding impacts the rice production in Nigeria. And that was Richard Ogundele, the founder and CEO of JMSF Agribusiness Nigeria. And that's all we have on today's episode of Beyond Markets. Thank you for joining us. As always, you can watch all previous episodes of Beyond Markets on our website, cnbcafrica.com, and stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets. Follow me at Kenneth Igbomo, and do have a wonderful evening.